My name is Maya. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that family meant unconditional love and support. I thought that even when your parents made mistakes, their hearts were always in the right place. I thought that success looked different for everyone, and that parents celebrated their children's unique paths. I was wrong about all of it. What I discovered about my family's true priorities didn't just break my heart, it shattered every assumption I'd ever made about the people who raised me. And the moment I realized how deep their deception went, everything changed. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, if you've ever been told your dreams weren't worth investing in, or if you've ever wondered whether you were seeing family favoritism clearly or just being paranoid, this story is going to validate every instinct you've ever had. Because sometimes the truth is even worse than what you suspected. Growing up, I was always the creative one in the family. While my younger sister Emma focused on academics and science, I was the one sketching in margins, painting in the garage, and turning every school project into an art piece. My parents, both accountants who met in business school, seemed bemused by my artistic inclinations. They would smile indulgently when I showed them my work, but I could sense their underlying concern about my future prospects. Emma, on the other hand, announced at age 12 that she wanted to be a doctor, and from that moment forward, she could do no wrong. Every good grade was celebrated with dinner out. Every science fair project was photographed and shared with relatives. Every academic achievement was met with pride that felt different from the polite encouragement I received for my art. But I told myself this was normal. Emma was pursuing a stable, well-respected career path. Of course they were proud. I convinced myself that their quieter support for my artistic pursuits was just their way of processing something they didn't fully understand. I was determined to prove that creativity could be just as valuable and meaningful as traditional success. When it came time for college applications, the differences in our treatment became more apparent. Emma's application process was a family event. My parents researched schools with her, visited campuses, and celebrated every acceptance letter. When I was applying to art schools, I largely handled the process alone. They attended one campus visit with me, spending most of the time asking practical questions about job placement rates and starting salaries for graduates. I was accepted to several prestigious art programs, ultimately choosing one with an excellent reputation and strong alumni network. The tuition was significant, about $45,000 per year for 4 years. My parents agreed to pay for my education, though I could sense their reluctance. They frequently mentioned the cost and questioned whether I was sure about my path. They suggested I consider a double major or a minor in business, just to keep my options open. Emma, meanwhile, was accepted to multiple pre-med programs. When she chose her school, which cost nearly the same as mine, the conversations were completely different. There was no mention of the expense, no suggestions for backup plans, just pure pride and excitement about her future as a doctor. Throughout college, the disparities continued. When Emma called home to share news about her grades or research opportunities, I could hear the excitement in my parents' voices. When I called to share news about exhibitions, awards, or internships I'd secured, their responses felt polite but distant. They attended my college art shows, but spent most of the time looking uncomfortable and asking when I planned to graduate. I graduated summa cum laude with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, having earned several departmental awards and already secured representation from a small but respectable gallery. My parents attended my graduation, took the obligatory photos, but their enthusiasm felt forced. At the celebration dinner, they spent most of the evening talking about Emma's upcoming MCAT scores. After graduation, I moved to a major city to pursue my art career while working part-time at a museum to support myself. It was challenging, but I was making progress. I was participating in group shows, building my portfolio, and slowly establishing myself in the art community. My parents' response to my updates about my career was consistently lukewarm. They would ask when I planned to find a real job, or suggest I consider teaching as a more stable option. Emma, meanwhile, was finishing her undergraduate degree and preparing for medical school applications. The contrast in how our post-graduation plans were discussed was stark. Emma's path was referred to as her bright future, while mine was described as my phase or my artistic exploration. The real revelation came during Emma's senior year of college, when she was accepted to several medical school programs. I was visiting home for the weekend when my parents sat us both down for what they called a family financial discussion. They explained that medical school was extremely expensive, and they wanted to make sure Emma could focus on her studies without worrying about money. They announced that they were giving Emma $50,000 toward her medical school expenses, in addition to covering her remaining costs. They presented this as a family investment in her future, something that would benefit everyone in the long run. They spoke about how proud they were of her dedication and how they wanted to support her dreams. I sat there feeling a strange mix of emotions. I was happy for Emma. She had worked hard and deserved support. But I couldn't help wondering why my dreams had never been described as investments, why my education had been treated as an expense rather than an opportunity. I didn't say anything in that moment, but the feeling of being the less valued child settled deeper into my chest. What made it worse was how they framed the decision. They explained that they were able to give Emma this money because they had been careful with their investments and because her career path had such clear returns. The implication was obvious. My artistic career was too risky and uncertain to merit the same level of investment. Over the following months, I watched as my parents celebrated every milestone in Emma's medical school journey while continuing to treat my career with polite disinterest. When I landed my first solo exhibition, they attended but left early and spent the evening discussing Emma's anatomy grades. When I received a positive review in a respected art publication, they glanced at it briefly and changed the subject to Emma's clinical rotations. The systematic dismissal was becoming impossible to ignore. During family gatherings, I was introduced as their daughter who did art, while Emma was introduced as their daughter, the future doctor. When relatives asked about my work, my parents would quickly redirect the conversation to Emma's achievements. It felt like they were embarrassed by my career choice and proud of hers. I started to withdraw from family events, claiming I was too busy with work. In truth, I was protecting myself from the constant reminder that I was the disappointment, the child whose dreams weren't worth celebrating. My parents seemed not to notice my absence, or if they did, they didn't comment on it. The breaking point came during my second year of professional practice when I was 26. I had been working steadily, building my reputation, and finally achieving some financial stability through my art. I was proud of what I had accomplished, especially given that I had received significantly less financial support than Emma. I learned about what happened next through a phone call from my aunt, my mother's sister, who had always been supportive of my artistic pursuits. She called me sounding confused and concerned, asking if I knew about Emma's situation. When I told her I didn't know what she meant, she explained that Emma had apparently failed out of medical school during her second year. My aunt had heard this from my grandmother, who had heard it from my mother during what was supposed to be a casual phone call. According to my aunt, Emma had been struggling academically for months, had failed several crucial exams, and had ultimately been dismissed from the program. My parents had known about her academic problems for some time, but hadn't mentioned it to anyone in the family. I was shocked. Emma had always been the perfect student, the one who succeeded at everything academic. But what shocked me more was that my parents hadn't told me any of this. We spoke regularly, and they had continued to reference Emma's medical school progress as recently as the previous week. When I called my parents to ask about Emma's situation, they were clearly uncomfortable. They confirmed that Emma was no longer in medical school but insisted it was temporary, that she was taking time to figure out her next steps. They asked me not to mention it to other family members, explaining that Emma was embarrassed and needed privacy to make her decisions. I respected their request for discretion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Emma had always been confident and accomplished. The idea that she would simply fail out seemed inconsistent with everything I knew about her character and abilities. A few weeks later, Emma called me directly. She sounded different, uncertain and vulnerable in a way I'd never heard before. She explained that she had been struggling in medical school, not just academically, but emotionally. She had realized during her first year that she didn't actually want to be a doctor, that she had been pursuing medicine because it was what everyone expected of her, not because it was her genuine passion. She had tried to make it work, but the pressure and lack of genuine interest had led to poor performance. Eventually, she had made the decision to leave the program, though she hadn't yet figured out what she wanted to do instead. She was living at home with our parents and trying to determine her next steps. What struck me most about our conversation was Emma's admission that she had always envied my certainty about my path. She told me she wished she had my courage to pursue something creative and unconventional, that she had always felt pressured to choose a safe, approved career rather than exploring her own interests. This conversation shifted my entire perspective on our family dynamics. Emma hadn't been the golden child because she was inherently more valuable or talented. She had been the favorite because she was following the path our parents approved of. And now that she had stepped off that path, she was experiencing the same kind of uncertainty and lack of support that I had always known. But the real revelation was still coming. A few months after Emma left medical school, I was visiting home for my birthday. During dinner, my parents were discussing Emma's future plans, expressing concern about her direction, and wondering what kind of career counseling might help her find her way. The conversation frustrated me because it highlighted the double standard I had always experienced. Emma was getting career counseling and patient support to find her path, while I had been told to be practical and find a real job. I finally decided to address the disparity directly. I asked my parents why Emma was receiving so much support and guidance now when I had never received the same consideration for my career choices. I pointed out that I had been successfully building my art career for years, but they had never shown the same level of interest or pride in my accomplishments that they were now showing in helping Emma figure out her next steps. The conversation that followed revealed the extent of my parents' true feelings about my choices. My mother explained that they had always viewed my art career as a hobby rather than a profession, something I was doing until I found something more stable and conventional. They had been waiting for me to outgrow my artistic phase and choose a more practical path. My father added that they had given Emma the $50,000 for medical school because they saw it as an investment in a stable future, while they viewed supporting my art career as throwing money away on an uncertain outcome. They couldn't understand why I was upset about the different treatment since, in their view, the situations were completely different. What hurt most was their inability to see my success as legitimate. I had been supporting myself through my art for years, had built a reputation in my field, and was earning a respectable income doing work I loved. But because it didn't fit their definition of a proper career, they couldn't acknowledge it as valuable. The conversation ended with my parents suggesting that maybe now would be a good time for me to consider a career change, perhaps joining Emma in exploring more practical options. They seemed to view Emma's departure from medical school as an opportunity for both of us to get serious about our futures. I left that dinner feeling a clarity I had never experienced before. The problem wasn't that I had chosen the wrong path or that I wasn't successful enough to earn their respect. The problem was that my parents had a narrow definition of success and value, and they were unable to appreciate anything that fell outside those boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I found myself reflecting on years of interactions with my family, seeing them through this new lens of understanding. I realized that their lack of enthusiasm for my achievements hadn't been about my performance. It had been about their prejudices. Their dismissal of my career wasn't based on my results, but on their assumptions about what kinds of work were worthy of respect. This realization was both painful and liberating. It was painful because it meant accepting that my parents' love and support were conditional on my conforming to their values. But it was liberating because it meant I could stop trying to earn their approval and focus on building a life that fulfilled me. Around this time, my art career reached a significant milestone. I was offered a solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery, the kind of opportunity that represents a major breakthrough for any artist. The exhibition would showcase 3 years of my work and would likely attract significant attention from collectors and critics. When I told my parents about the exhibition, their response was predictably lukewarm. They congratulated me politely, but immediately began asking practical questions about whether I was making money from my art and whether I had considered this as a stepping stone to something more stable. Their response crystallized something for me. I realized that no amount of success in my chosen field would ever be enough to earn their genuine pride and support. They were fundamentally unable to value what I was doing because it didn't align with their understanding of legitimate work. The exhibition itself was a tremendous success. Several of my pieces sold to serious collectors, and I received reviews that established me as an emerging artist to watch. The opening night was attended by hundreds of people, including several established figures in the art world who took time to speak with me about my work. My parents attended the opening, but their behavior was telling. They spent most of the evening looking uncomfortable and out of place, speaking briefly with other attendees, but clearly not understanding or appreciating the significance of the event. They left early, explaining that they had an early morning the next day. What struck me most was the contrast between their reaction and the reaction of Emma, who had also attended the opening. Emma was genuinely excited and proud, spending the evening asking thoughtful questions about my work and expressing amazement at what I had accomplished. She told me she had never realized the depth and sophistication of what I was doing, and apologized for not paying closer attention to my career over the years. Emma's response highlighted what was missing from my parents' reaction. She was able to appreciate my success, even though it was in a field she didn't fully understand, because she approached it with genuine curiosity and love, rather than predetermined judgments about what kinds of success were valuable. The success of the exhibition led to additional opportunities, including representation by a larger gallery and interest from several art publications. My income from my art was becoming substantial, reaching levels that compared favorably to many traditional professions. I was doing exactly what I had always wanted to do, and I was succeeding at it both artistically and financially. But my parents' attitude remained unchanged. When I shared news about new opportunities or financial milestones, they would acknowledge them briefly before redirecting the conversation to other topics. They seemed unable to process the reality that I was thriving in a career they had never respected. The situation with Emma, meanwhile, had evolved in interesting ways. After months of uncertainty, she had decided to pursue a graduate degree in environmental science, a field that genuinely interested her. My parents were supportive of this decision, offering both emotional and financial support for her new path. What was revealing was how differently they approached Emma's career change compared to how they had always treated my career choice. Emma was encouraged to explore her interests and follow her passion, while I had always been encouraged to be practical and conventional. Emma's shift to a new field was described as brave and admirable, while my commitment to my artistic path had been characterized as stubborn and unrealistic. The double standard was impossible to ignore, and it forced me to confront some difficult truths about my family relationships. I realized that my parents' love and support were not unconditional. They were contingent on my making choices they approved of. As long as I pursued a path they didn't respect, I would never receive the same level of support and pride they offered Emma. This realization led me to make some important decisions about my relationship with my family. I decided to establish clearer boundaries around how I discussed my career and life choices. I stopped seeking their approval or trying to educate them about the value of my work. Instead, I focused on building relationships with people who could appreciate and support what I was doing. I also decided to be more selective about family gatherings and interactions. I continued to maintain relationships with my parents and Emma, but I protected myself from situations where I knew I would face dismissal or lack of support. I learned to redirect conversations when they became critical or dismissive, and I stopped sharing detailed information about my career achievements with people who couldn't appreciate them. The boundary setting wasn't easy, and it required me to accept that my relationship with my parents would never be what I had hoped it could be. But it was necessary for my emotional well-being and continued success. I needed to surround myself with people who valued what I was doing, rather than constantly trying to convince people who were fundamentally unable to appreciate it. One of the most healing aspects of this process was connecting with other artists and creative professionals who had experienced similar family dynamics. I discovered that many people in creative fields had struggled with lack of family support and understanding. Sharing these experiences helped me realize that the problem wasn't unique to my family or my choices. It was a broader cultural issue about how we value different kinds of work and success. Through conversations with other artists, I learned strategies for maintaining family relationships while protecting professional identity. I discovered that many successful creative professionals had gone through similar processes of establishing boundaries and finding alternative sources of support and validation. These connections also helped me understand that my parents' attitudes reflected broader societal prejudices about creative work rather than personal failures on my part. Their inability to appreciate my career wasn't a reflection of my worth or success. It was a reflection of their limited understanding of value and achievement. As my career continued to develop, I found increasingly meaningful ways to use my experience to support other artists and creative professionals. I began mentoring younger artists who were struggling with family disapproval, sharing strategies for building confidence and finding supportive communities. I also became involved in organizations that advocate for arts education and support for creative careers. Having experienced firsthand how damaging it can be when families dismiss creative pursuits, I wanted to work toward changing those attitudes and creating more support for young people pursuing artistic paths. Emma and I, meanwhile, developed a much stronger relationship as adults. Her experience of leaving medical school and facing our parents' concerns about her future gave her insight into what I had always experienced. She became genuinely interested in my work and one of my strongest supporters within the family. Emma's support was particularly meaningful because it demonstrated that family members could change and grow in their understanding. While my parents remained largely unable to appreciate my career, Emma had developed the capacity to value and celebrate what I was doing. The contrast between Emma's evolution and my parents' stagnation highlighted an important distinction. Some people are capable of expanding their definitions of success and value when presented with new information and perspectives. Others remain committed to their existing beliefs regardless of evidence that might challenge them. Understanding this distinction helped me make peace with my parents' limitations while appreciating the family members who were capable of growth and change. It allowed me to maintain relationships with different family members in ways that were appropriate to their capacity for understanding and support. Now, several years after that pivotal conversation at my birthday dinner, I can see the situation with greater clarity and less emotional pain. My parents' inability to appreciate my career was never about my performance or worth. It was about their narrow definitions of success and their fear of anything that didn't fit conventional expectations. Their treatment of me versus their treatment of Emma reflected their values and limitations, not an accurate assessment of our respective worth or potential. Emma and I had both succeeded in our chosen paths, but only one of those paths aligned with what our parents could understand and appreciate. The $50,000 they gave Emma for medical school was never really about the money. It was about their investment in a dream they could comprehend and support. They couldn't make the same investment in my artistic career because they couldn't envision or value the kind of success I was pursuing. This understanding allowed me to stop taking their dismissal personally and start seeing it as information about their capacity for appreciation rather than my worthiness of support. It freed me to pursue my career with confidence and to seek validation from sources that were capable of providing it meaningfully. Today, my art career continues to thrive. I've had multiple solo exhibitions, my work is collected internationally, and I earn a comfortable living doing work I love. More importantly, I've built a life surrounded by people who appreciate and support what I do, including Emma, who has become one of my closest friends and strongest advocates. My relationship with my parents has settled into a stable but limited pattern. We maintain contact and care about each other, but I no longer seek their professional approval or share detailed information about my career achievements. They have never acknowledged the disparity in how they treated Emma's and my career choices, and I no longer expect them to. Sometimes I wonder what our relationship might have been like if they had been able to appreciate different forms of success and achievement. But I've learned that some people are simply unable to expand beyond their existing frameworks of understanding, and that's more about their limitations than about the value of what they're unable to see. What I want anyone watching who has experienced similar family dynamics to understand is that your worth is not determined by your family's ability to appreciate your choices. Some families are better equipped to support conventional paths than creative or unconventional ones, and that says nothing about the value of those alternative paths. If you're pursuing something your family doesn't understand or support, that doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means you need to find other sources of validation and encouragement while protecting yourself from voices that can't appreciate what you're doing. Building a successful life sometimes requires making peace with the fact that the people we most want approval from may be the least equipped to provide it. The goal isn't to convince them they're wrong, it's to build confidence and success independent of their understanding. Your dreams and aspirations deserve to be taken seriously, even if your family can't see their value. Success comes in many forms, and the most meaningful success is often the kind that aligns with your authentic interests and abilities rather than other people's expectations. If you've experienced favoritism in your family based on career choices, if you've been told your dreams aren't practical enough to support, or if you've succeeded in a field your family doesn't respect, I want you to know that your experience is valid and your achievements matter. Have you dealt with family members who couldn't appreciate your career choices? How did you handle the balance between maintaining relationships and protecting your professional confidence? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, because these experiences are more common than we often realize, and sharing them helps all of us feel less alone in navigating these complex family dynamics.